Hey, today we're making this. Let's get right down to it. First of all, we're going to delete the default cube and everything else, and we're going to will some geometry into existence. All right, now that we have some geometry, first and foremost, the shading does not matter. This particular model is fully textured. It's got everything done in Substance Painter, but it really does not matter for what we're doing today. The settings that do matter, however, we need to be in cycles. We want to be rendering in CPU. Now, the sampling does not matter. Low samples are actually better for what we're doing here. Our film can stay the default. The important thing is we want crypto matte here on the object. 6 levels is enough, and make sure the accurate mode is on. We also have another scene here, which is just a linked scene I made. And this has no crypto matte. It's also set to 32 samples. We are, however, using GPU compute and 256 by 256 because my computer can handle it. Because what we have here in the view layer properties, inside the filter, everything is checked off except for freestyle. This is going to be our freestyle pass. And if you want to take a look at the specific freestyle settings that I have here, these are mostly defaults, with one exception. The thickness has a modifier, a long stroke applied to it, and it's a curve that goes like this. Feel free to replicate it or just leave it default, down to you. So back to this scene. Now if we render this out, boom, we get just a normal cycles render. Very noisy, not the best. The trick is compositing. So,
No! God, please, no! No! No!
this is what we're going to be using. First things first, use nodes. Make sure this is checked. Second, if you don't have Node Wrangler enabled, enable Node Wrangler. You're going to want to commit die if you don't have Node Wrangler on, because it is absolutely 100% necessary for this. We're going to be doing a lot, and I mean a lot, of connecting various nodes to the viewer. So, let's do it right now. Control, Shift, left click, boom. Our render is connected to the viewer. Let's maybe move that out of the way for now. So first thing we want to bring in is a crypto matte node. We're going to want to connect this appropriately. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be selecting parts of this model to individually, quote unquote, shade in compositing. We're going to be applying color. Now, this is why I said that it doesn't matter whether you texture it or not, or it doesn't matter much if you texture it or not, because we are going to be working with pretty much a black and white image anyway to start us off with. So, to pick our objects, we just connect the pick node to the viewer node, and we get this wonderful image. What we're going to do now is we're just going to pick, let's say the head here, anything that's like this yellow, this dirty yellow. We're going to pick that. So, we're going to add this. We're going to add this. We're going to add this. Let's see what we have. That's pretty okay. And maybe we'll add this, because this is also this sort of dirty brown color. So now that we have everything picked out, our sort of workspace picked out for this, first thing we're going to do is we're immediately going to alpha over a white image. Now you might say, why? Well, the reason is simple. For some reason, the image output of the cryptomat, if you do anything to it without alpha overing it first, it's going to break and it's just going to work on the whole image. We don't want that. We want to work just on these little bits so we can achieve color in the particular little segments. So, we're going to bring in a dilate erode node. We're actually going to bring in two of them. We're going to change them to distance, and we're going to go, say, 6, and bring it back with -6. That looks about right. Let's try -5. Yeah, that looks all right. So what we're doing here, we're taking these nodes. If we take a look at the output of the dilate node here, or the erode node in this case, what's happening is it's iterating over the image. It's taking every pixel, then comparing its value to the pixels around it. And then if the pixels around it have a different value to what the sampled pixel is, it equalizes their value to the value of the sampled pixel. It's basically kind of a median filter. It can be used as a proper median filter, but it's kind of a median filter. And the distance mode, as opposed to, for example, the step mode, all it does is it ensures that 8 pixels around it are sampled instead of 4. Right. Next step in our little journey here is going to be bringing in 3, count them, 3 color ramps. 1, 2, 3. Connect them all. And let's take the first color ramp. Now, what we want out of the first color ramp is the highlights of the image, the brighter spots of this black and white image. We are going to be using these color ramps to separate the highlights, the midtones, and the darkest portions of the image into 3 little manageable bits that we can then use to apply color. So first things first, let's just do this. There we go. Yeah, that's pretty much the rough highlight that I want. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign a color to it. Something like this, maybe. Now, we don't really want the black portions here. We need to get rid of them. And we don't really want the whole background here. So we're going to bring in 2 color key nodes. 1, 2. The first color key node is going to get rid of the background. And the second color key node is going to get rid of the black stuff. I get rid of the black stuff. There we go. Now don't worry about these little halos that we have here. We could do a little bit of work to remove them, but these are entirely inconsequential. These are all going to be covered up, either by the other portions or ultimately by the freestyle pass. So it's fine. Same thing with the other color ramp. Connected to it. We want midtones. Maybe let's do the darkest portions first. So we want here. I want to bring this in a little bit. Actually, don't want to bring this in. We just want to reduce the white portion here. Maybe a little more. Just a little more. Yeah, that's about right. Now we're going to assign something to it. Like a nice deep brown color. A lot darker, and that is still wrong. Go. Darker, darker still. Very nice. Now, we don't really need to get rid of anything aside from the background here, so we're just going to bring in a color key. And we're just going to get rid of this. Okay, that's a bit much perhaps, because it is getting rid of everything. So we need to reduce this color key. We need to reduce the parameters here to be more restrictive. And now we have our little portion here. So what we want now here in this middle color ramp is the midtones. So we're going to bring this in a little bit. Need to get rid of... that looks more or less right. I'm judging by this portion here, not by anything else. So this might not be perfect, but we can always adjust this a little bit later. Maybe a little more. Maybe get this down a little bit. Go. Take this slider down a little bit. This looks about right. And again, we're going to assign a color here. Something like maybe a little more into the yellows. And of course, darker. And we're going to follow the same exact procedure as we have here. So we're in 2 color keys. This thing needs to go. And this needs to take care of the black colors. Excellent. So now, let's bring in some alpha overnodes. And I know that this is kind of ridiculous in that we had an alpha overnode and a bunch of color key nodes, but unfortunately this alpha overnode is absolutely necessary, like I said, because of the way the compositor works, specifically the way the cryptomat works. So we're going to take this alpha overnode and we're going to take these 2 images. Let me just compare this. See, we're filling things in. And we're going to grab another alpha overnode. Boom. And just connect it up. And that is not necessarily great. Always remember to increase your pre-meld to something. This is not necessarily great. What we're seeing here is that we are lacking some of the midtones around the head here and around the bottom here. So, and also here and here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take care of the midtones. We're going to go here and we're going to just bring this up a little bit and bring this down a little bit, maybe a little bit up. Okay, that looks more or less all right. There's always going to be some tweaking involved in this process. This is not a one-size-fits-all solution. You're going to have to absolutely tweak this. And I'm going to tweak this a little later. But as an initial thing, this is pretty good. So we can now bring this in here, connect this up to the composite, and we can take this entire thing, press Ctrl G to make it into a node group, tab out back, and we're going to repeat this process until we have taken care of every last single piece of this model and colored it properly. One thing to remember is every time you duplicate this node group, remember to make it single user. Make it a single user copy before you connect it up, before you change anything. Because if you don't, well, let's just say that I've made that mistake more than once and I've paid for it with hours of my time. Alright, here we are. Now, as you can see, I had to make quite a few of these node groups, and I had to fiddle around quite a bit, and every one of these node groups is exactly like I showed you, just tweaked a little bit, but it is exactly the same thing. I changed the dilator to be 6 and -7, for example, for this particular model. And every single one of these node groups is very similar, but also unique in its own way. This, for example, takes care of the railings at the back. We have our color selection with the color ramps, just a little bit different, and the dilator nodes are different too. The values are 2 and -3. Now, I find that this sort of combination of n and basically -n+1 or -1 in this case, is a good combo to achieve the result we're looking for. Additionally, you are going to have to change these values, increase them, decrease them, depending on how much detail you want to preserve. If you want to preserve more detail, these values need to be lower and, well, higher for the negative values, of course. If you want to just have more splotchiness, you can increase and decrease them respectively. It's something you have to play around, but the basic idea remains the same. Crypto, alpha over, dilator road, color ramps to bring out the highlights, the midtones, and the darkest portions of the image, color key until you have a reasonably well keyed image, alpha over the shadows and the midtones, and then alpha over the resulting image over the under the highlights, and output it. And then we can just take all of these and alpha over them over each other. All right. The next step is to fill in the little gaps that we have here. So we're going to bring in an in-paint node and play around with it a little bit. So let's try one. What the in-paint node does is it takes the areas between colors and it paints them in. This is not usually meant for stuff like this. It's usually meant for if you are cryptomatting or just matting in general. A chroma key, for example. But in this case, one, maybe two. In this case, it's going to help us make this image a little more consistent. Yeah, very good. Cool. All right. The next step to making this a little more palatable is a little bit of blur before we alpha over anything. So we're going to find us a blur node, add it here, and instead of Gaussian, we're going to go for K-trim, and so let's say 3 and 3 here. Yeah, that looks about right. I'm going to play around with this a little more. Alright, so for this model I've settled on in-paint of 2 and K-trim blur of 4 and 4 in the X and Y, and the size of 1. Okay, the next step is going to be displacement. This is a little too perfect for my taste. We need to displace this image a little so it's not perfectly, there aren't no perfectly straight lines. There is nothing like that. We need some imperfection in this to achieve a more painterly look. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a displace node. Excellent. Then we're going to bring in a texture node. And this texture, we're going to... Oh, this is actually great. I already have a texture pre-made here. It is just the clouds, improved Perlin, and size of about 0.5, depth of 5. This doesn't really matter that much. Now we're going to plug this, we're going to be plugging this in into the X and Y scale in a minute. But if we plug this in right now, what's going to happen if we say do 10, not 100, maybe 10 and 10 on the vectors and the XY vectors of the image, and we plug this in right now, what's going to happen is it's just going to displace this image to a varying degree, but it's just going to displace this image one direction. What we want this displacement to be not just variable, but we want it to also displace both directions, so both negative and positive. Now, the cloud texture is black and white, and the value is black and white, so it's between 0 and 1. So we have to make it between -1 and 1. So the easiest way to do that, we're going to add a couple of math nodes here, and we're just going to connect this up, and this is going to be subtract, and we're going to subtract 5. So if our value of a pixel is 1, then that's going to be well, 0.5. If the value is 0, then it's going to be negative 0.5. Then we're going to duplicate this node, and we're going to multiply this value. Come on. See, this is the problem. Don't put your nodes too close together or this will happen. Okay, and we're going to multiply this by 2. So that way our range is -1, 2, 1. And we're going to plug this into our x and y scale. And the result is, as you can see, a little more distorted. Next up, we're going to play around with giving this a bit of a background. Now we could theoretically alpha over with just a white background. That's entirely a possibility, but it would be much more interesting if we put something a little different underneath. Now I already have this prepared. So what we've done here is I've taken 2 images that I just downloaded, free images. The attribution is down in the comments. And what one of these images is, it is a watercolor wash, and the other one is a paper texture. I've added a little bit of a displace to the watercolor and a little bit of a scale to both of them just to scale them down correctly. And we're just alpha overing one over the other, just alpha over, and then finally I brought in the scene 0.001. This is our freestyle pass, and just use it to alpha over anything we had here, and then the whole image got multiplied with a kind of not entirely a factor of 1, but something like 0.985 is what I find usually works best for this particular set of images over this stock paper image. And now, with this entire setup in place, if we fire it off and we render it and we wait, we get our image. Wonderful. So again, just to reiterate what's going on here, our nodes here, our node groups, are all just taking part of a cryptomat, and we're separating inside those nodes, we're separating the highlights, the midtones, and the darkest bits of the image after dilation and some erosion. Then we're color keying them, and then alpha overing one over the other. Then we have the alpha over staircase of doom, where literally all these nodes and all these parts of the image get alpha overed one over the other. So if we take a look at this, every single one of those is going to increase the amount of detail we get in that image. After that, we have an in-paint node that just paints in a little few of the missing details, a K-trim blur, 4 and 4, a displacement using a cloud texture with subtract and multiply, and finally, we just alpha over this over some sort of interesting background, in this case, a watercolor wash, and a paper texture, and then we multiply everything onto it. And our final result is this.